The notification pinged on my phone at 11:47 p.m., just as I was settling into bed after another exhausting day of caring for David. Motion detected in kitchen, the security app announced with its familiar blue glow. I almost ignored it. After all, David had been in a vegetative state for exactly 743 days since the construction accident that shattered our lives, and I was the only one in the house. Probably just our cat, Whiskers, I thought, but something made me tap the screen anyway. What I saw in that grainy night vision footage made my coffee mug slip from my fingers the next morning when I properly reviewed it. There was David, my supposedly comatose husband, standing at our kitchen counter at 3:47 a.m., methodically making a sandwich. Not stumbling, not confused, but moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. The timestamp showed he spent exactly 11 minutes in that kitchen, ate standing up, cleaned his plate, and walked back toward our bedroom with the steady gait of a perfectly healthy man. My name is Maya Peterson, and for the past 2 years, I had transformed my entire existence around David's care. I quit my position as a marketing director at Harrison Communications, a job I'd worked 12 years to build. I converted our guest room into a medical facility complete with a hospital bed, monitoring equipment, and enough supplies to stock a small clinic. I learned to operate feeding tubes, administer medications, and provide the kind of round-the-clock care that costs families thousands of dollars monthly in professional facilities. The doctors at Metropolitan General had been clear about David's prognosis after the accident. Severe traumatic brain injury, they said, minimal chance of meaningful recovery. Dr. Rebecca Chun, his neurologist, had used words like persistent vegetative state and long-term care planning. The insurance company stopped covering acute care after 6 months, which meant bringing David home was our only financial option. I'd spent $47,000 of our savings converting the house and purchasing medical equipment. I gave up everything to become his full-time caregiver because the alternative was a state facility that I couldn't bear to consider. David's routine had become my routine. Every morning at 6:30 a.m., I'd check his vitals, adjust his position to prevent bed sores, and administer his morning medications through the feeding tube. Physical therapy exercises came next, moving his limbs to maintain muscle tone, followed by the careful process of bathing and dressing him. The afternoons were filled with scheduled feedings, medication times, and the endless documentation that his care required. Evenings meant reading to him, playing his favorite music and talking about our day, hoping somewhere in that damaged brain he could hear my voice. I'd installed the security system 6 months ago after a break-in attempt in our neighborhood left me feeling vulnerable. Living alone with David in his condition made me an obvious target, the neighbors whispered. A woman caring for an invalid husband, isolated and distracted. The 4-camera system cost $800, but it provided peace of mind during the few hours I managed to sleep each night. The cameras covered all entry points and the main living areas, including the kitchen where I prepared David's liquid nutrition supplements. That footage changed everything I thought I knew about the past 743 days. I watched it 17 times that first morning, freezing the image at different moments to study David's movements. This wasn't the uncertain mobility of someone emerging from a coma. This was fluid, confident motion. He knew exactly where everything was located. He opened the refrigerator without hesitation, retrieved sandwich ingredients, and moved through our kitchen with the familiarity of someone who had been doing this regularly. When he finished eating, he rinsed his plate and returned it to the dishwasher in the exact spot I always placed it. The timestamp showed this happened during my deepest sleep period, typically between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. when David's overnight monitoring showed him in the most stable phase of his supposed unconscious state. I checked the previous week's footage and found similar activities on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday nights. Always the same time frame, always the same careful movements, always returning to bed before my 6:30 a.m. wake-up routine. Something's changed with David, I told Dr. Chan during his scheduled appointment 3 days later, watching carefully for her reaction. He seems more responsive lately. His muscle tone is better than I expected after this long. Dr. Chun examined him thoroughly, checking reflexes, pupil response, and muscle resistance. David remained perfectly limp, showing none of the responsiveness I'd witnessed on camera. His performance was flawless. I don't see significant change, she concluded after 45 minutes of testing. His condition appears consistent with previous evaluations. Are you getting enough rest, Maya? Caregiver fatigue can sometimes create false impressions of improvement. Caregiver fatigue. False impressions. I nodded politely while planning my next move. I began varying my sleep schedule, staying awake randomly during different overnight hours. On the nights I remained vigilant, David never moved. But when I genuinely fell asleep, exhausted from the surveillance routine, the cameras captured his nocturnal activities. He was somehow monitoring my sleep patterns, timing his mobility for when I was least likely to discover him. The realization that David had been conscious for an unknown period, while I devoted my entire life to his care, was devastating enough. But as I continued reviewing months of archived footage, a more sinister picture emerged. David wasn't just hiding his recovery. He was actively maintaining the deception. I found footage of him adjusting his own position in bed after I'd left for grocery runs, returning to exactly the pose I'd left him in before my return. Video of him manipulating the monitoring equipment, creating false readings that supported his unconscious state. Most disturbing of all, recordings of him standing beside my bed while I slept, watching me for minutes at a time before returning to his medical bed and resuming his vegetative performance. Why would someone fake a coma for 2 years? I asked my sister Amanda during one of her weekly check-in calls, speaking hypothetically. Amanda was a nurse practitioner who'd helped me understand David's medical needs when I'd first brought him home. Insurance fraud, avoiding legal consequences, psychological reasons, she answered without hesitation. We see malingering in different forms, but maintaining a fake coma would require incredible dedication. The physical deterioration alone would be severe. Why do you ask? Physical deterioration. I looked at David's body with new eyes during his next care session. For someone who'd been bedridden for 743 days, his muscle mass was remarkably preserved. I'd attributed this to the physical therapy routine, but now I understood the real reason. David had been secretly exercising, maintaining his strength while I'd exhausted myself, preventing his supposed decline. I started documenting everything. Screenshots of his nighttime activities, notes about his too-perfect muscle tone, records of monitoring equipment anomalies I'd previously dismissed. I also began researching the original accident that had supposedly caused his brain injury, the construction site incident. That started this nightmare. What I discovered made my hands shake as I typed search terms into my laptop. The Riverside construction project where David had been injured was owned by Morrison Development, a company with multiple safety violations and pending lawsuits. David had been the site supervisor responsible for implementing safety protocols. 3 workers had been seriously injured in separate incidents during the 4 months preceding David's accident, and all 3 had filed complaints alleging negligent supervision. The accident report described David falling from scaffolding and striking his head on concrete, but several witness statements seemed inconsistent. 2 workers claimed they'd seen David walking normally after the fall, talking coherently, and refusing immediate medical attention. The ambulance wasn't called until 30 minutes later, after David had supposedly lost consciousness. The hospital's initial evaluation noted his responsiveness to verbal commands and appropriate pupil response, but a second neurological assessment 12 hours later documented the severe brain injury that would define the next 2 years of our lives. Morrison Development had settled all pending lawsuits within 6 months of David's accident, citing compassionate circumstances surrounding the supervisor's tragic injury. The total settlement amount was sealed, but court records indicated David had received a substantial disability payment and ongoing medical coverage through Morrison's insurance carrier. I called Morrison's corporate office and asked to speak with someone about David's case. After being transferred 3 times, I reached Patricia Wells in their legal department. "Mrs. Peterson, I remember your husband's case," she said carefully. "Such a tragic situation. How is David's recovery progressing?" "He's still in a vegetative state," I replied, watching her reaction through the phone silence. "We're managing his care at home. The doctors say his condition is permanent." Another pause. "I see. Well, please know that Morrison continues to cover his medical expenses as agreed. If there are any changes in his condition that affect his care needs, please notify our insurance coordinator immediately." Changes in his condition. If there are any changes. The phrasing seemed oddly specific, almost like a warning. That night, I pretended to take my usual sleep medication but remained awake, monitoring David through the bedroom camera on my phone. At 2:23 a.m., he rose from his medical bed with fluid motion and walked to our home office. I watched him turn on the computer, type for several minutes, then return to bed. This was a new behavior, one I'd never witnessed before. I checked the computer's browser history the next morning. David had accessed his email account, something I'd been managing for him since the accident. He deleted several messages, but I managed to recover them from the trash folder. Most were routine medical appointment confirmations and insurance correspondence that I'd been handling. But one email made my blood run cold. It was from Morrison Development's insurance coordinator, sent 3 days earlier. David, as discussed, your continuing benefits depend on maintaining your current medical status. Any indication of recovery will trigger immediate benefit termination and potential fraud investigation. Please confirm receipt of this message and destroy this email. Below that was David's response, sent at 2:27 a.m. while I'd been watching him through the security camera. Understood. Status unchanged. Maya suspects nothing. Continue current arrangement. I printed that email exchange and sat staring at it for 20 minutes, trying to process the magnitude of David's deception. He wasn't just faking a coma to avoid facing the consequences of his negligent supervision. He was actively collecting disability payments while maintaining his fraud, using my devoted care as cover for his scheme. The Morrison settlement wasn't compassionate assistance for a brain-injured worker. It was hush money for a supervisor who'd agreed to disappear quietly rather than testify about the company's safety violations. For 743 days, I'd sacrificed my career, my health, and my future to care for a man who was perfectly capable of caring for himself. David had watched me exhaust our savings on medical equipment, work myself into chronic fatigue, and isolate myself from friends and family, all while secretly maintaining his strength and collecting fraudulent benefits. The construction accident that had supposedly destroyed his brain had been real enough, but his recovery had been complete months ago. My phone buzzed with Dr. Chen's office calling to confirm David's next appointment. I answered with a voice I barely recognized as my own. This is Maya Peterson. I need to cancel my husband's appointment and discuss some new developments in his case. Has David's condition changed? The receptionist asked. I looked at the printed emails on my desk, then at David lying motionless in his medical bed, performing unconsciousness with an actor's dedication. Yes, I said quietly. His condition has definitely changed. I spent the next 3 days planning my approach with the same methodical care I devoted to David's medical routine. I contacted Patricia Wells at Morrison Development and scheduled a meeting to discuss David's ongoing care needs. I arranged for Amanda to visit during David's next appointment period, telling her I wanted a professional assessment of his muscle tone and responsiveness. Most importantly, I contacted an attorney who specialized in insurance fraud cases. Marcus Webb had prosecuted medical fraud for 15 years and agreed to meet with me after I'd described David's situation in general terms. His office was located downtown in the Hartwell building, a 40-minute drive from our house that would require leaving David alone longer than my usual grocery runs. Bring every piece of documentation you have, Marcus instructed during our phone conversation. Medical records, insurance correspondence, financial statements, and any evidence of the deceptive behavior. If your husband is maintaining fraud at this level, there will be multiple agencies interested in prosecution. The morning of my meeting with Marcus, I followed my usual routine with David until 10:30 a.m., then announced I had errands that would keep me away for several hours. I'd installed a new camera in our bedroom the previous night, positioned to capture David's bed from an angle he hadn't discovered yet. I'll be back this afternoon, I told his motionless form, watching for any reaction. Rest well. David's performance remained perfect until I'd been gone 47 minutes. The new camera captured him sitting up, checking his phone, and then walking to the kitchen where he prepared breakfast and coffee. He moved like a man who'd been maintaining this routine for months, comfortable and efficient in the very house where I'd been his supposed caregiver for over 2 years. Marcus Webb reviewed my evidence with the focused attention of someone who'd seen every variation of insurance fraud. The printed emails, security footage, medical billing records, and Morrison settlement documents painted a clear picture of systematic deception. "This is substantial fraud," he concluded after examining everything. "Your husband and Morrison Development have been defrauding their insurance carrier for almost 2 years. The disability benefits alone total nearly $400,000, not including medical coverage. Morrison saved millions by avoiding safety violation lawsuits. $400,000. While I'd spent our savings caring for him. What happens now?" I asked. "We coordinate with insurance investigators and law enforcement. Your documentation is thorough enough to support criminal charges. The security footage showing his normal functioning will be particularly compelling evidence." I returned home that afternoon to find David exactly where I'd left him, lying motionless in his medical bed. Except now I knew he'd spent the day moving freely through our house, probably believing his deception remained secure. "How was your day?" I asked him, adjusting his blanket just as I had for 743 previous days. No response, of course. David's performance was too practiced to break from casual conversation. That evening, I prepared his dinner through the feeding tube while describing my errands and the beautiful weather he was missing. I spoke in the same loving tone I'd used throughout his supposed coma, the voice of a devoted wife caring for her helpless husband. David's vital signs remained steady, his breathing deep and even, his eyes closed in perfect imitation of unconsciousness. At 11:30 p.m., I administered his usual nighttime medications and settled into bed with my phone, pretending to review emails while actually monitoring the security cameras. David waited until 12:47 a.m. before rising from his bed, but this time I was ready. I followed him silently through our house, watching as he moved to the kitchen and began preparing food. When he opened the refrigerator, I turned on the lights. "Hello, David." He froze completely, a container of leftover pasta halfway to the counter. For perhaps 30 seconds, we stared at each other in our kitchen, the harsh overhead lighting eliminating any possibility of pretense. David's face showed the alert awareness of someone who'd been conscious for months, not the confusion of someone emerging from a coma. "Maya," he said finally, his voice clear and strong. "I can explain." "I'm sure you can," I replied, holding up my phone to show the security footage of his nighttime activities. "But I'm more interested in this explanation." I played the video of him adjusting monitoring equipment, followed by footage of him standing beside my bed while I slept. David watched his own deception unfold on my phone screen, and I saw the moment he realized how completely his fraud had been documented. "How long have you known?" he asked quietly. "Long enough to involve insurance investigators and prosecutors," I answered truthfully. The Morrison emails were particularly enlightening. David's face went pale. "You don't understand the situation with Morrison. Those safety violations, the lawsuits, it was all complicated. What I understand is that you've been collecting $400,000 in fraudulent disability benefits, while I've spent 2 years destroying my life to care for you." He sat down heavily at our kitchen table, no longer maintaining any pretense of brain injury. "I never meant for it to go this long. At first, it was just buying time until the lawsuits settled. Morrison needed me to stay out of court testimony, and the insurance money helped with our expenses. 2 years, David. 743 days of watching me sacrifice everything, while you secretly lived a normal life. I was going to tell you," he said desperately. "Once everything settled with Morrison, I was going to stage a gradual recovery. But then you seemed so committed to my care, and the money was helping with our expenses." Helping with our expenses. While I'd spent our savings on medical equipment for his fake condition. "The insurance investigators will be here tomorrow morning," I told him, "along with representatives from Morrison Development and probably law enforcement. You have tonight to decide how you want to handle this." David looked around our kitchen, perhaps seeing it clearly for the first time in 2 years instead of through the lens of his midnight deceptions. "What are you going to do?" I thought about the question while looking at the stranger who had been my husband for 8 years before the accident. The man I'd loved enough to sacrifice my career and health for. The man who'd watched me exhaust myself caring for his pretended helplessness. "I'm going to rebuild the life you cost me," I said finally. "Starting with getting back every dollar you stole." The investigation unfolded exactly as Marcus Webb had predicted. David's fraud was so thoroughly documented that his confession became a formality rather than a necessity. Morrison Development's involvement elevated the case to federal jurisdiction, with insurance fraud charges expanded to include conspiracy and racketeering. David received a federal sentence of 6 years with mandatory restitution. Morrison Development paid $12.7 million in fines and settlements. I received $400,000 in recovered fraudulent benefits plus damages that covered my lost income and medical equipment expenses. More importantly, I received something David couldn't steal: the knowledge that I was capable of rebuilding my life from nothing. Within 8 months of David's sentencing, I'd launched a consulting business helping families navigate medical care transitions. My experience managing David's supposed condition, combined with my marketing background, created a unique expertise that hospitals and families valued. The business grew because I understood something David never did. Trust isn't just given. It's earned through consistent action over time. Every client who hired me knew I'd devoted 2 years to care that would have challenged professional medical staff. That commitment, even though it had been based on deception, demonstrated the kind of reliability that builds successful businesses. I kept one reminder of those 743 days: the security camera footage of David's first captured midnight kitchen visit. Not as a memorial to betrayal, but as proof that truth eventually surfaces, no matter how carefully deception is maintained. Sometimes the most expensive education comes from discovering that the person you die for isn't worth the sacrifice. David taught me that lesson, and then taught the justice system that fraud always costs more than honesty. If this story sounds familiar, maybe it's time to trust those instincts that whisper when something doesn't add up. Subscribe if you believe that the truth, however painful, is always worth more than a beautiful lie.